So who am I? I'm a product of my mom and dad, as is most people. But my mom, she was a member of a family that had 11 brothers and sisters. So she and my dad were from what's known as the greatest generation. My mom was born in the 20s, so she gardened. She had the Depression era that she lived through. She had a big garden. She had rhubarb. She had strawberries. We were always going out to pick all the strawberries. They didn't often make it to the house because we'd eat them when we were running in to bring them to her. But she loved nature. She loved to work outside. She loved trees. Um, she spent a lot of time. My dad was a Baptist minister, fundamentalist. We were in the Midwest, so my time was spent as a young girl. A lot of revivals, a lot of potluck dinners, a lot of folks that also had gardens, and so we had turtles sometimes for the meal when we'd visit other church members' homes. Um, we all drank and made our sweet tea out of a common big container that they take a big label and scoop out of. So that those are my roots, and that's how I grew up. And my grandma could make anything, big cobblers, and she had a stove that she cooked with wood in her stove to feed her 11 children and her family. And those are my memories as a child. Then when I grew up, I decided to go to college. And as I said, I started to be real interested in other people and other lives. And sort of got away from that experience and looked at how other people live. And we could say, we could identify me as a member of the hunter gatherer group. In contrast, if you look at members of other communities, perhaps persons that are Hispanic or Latino or African American, more of an agricultural pastoral community. So the pastoral agricultural community, those members of that community typically work in groups. There's more cooperation. There's more sense of duty. They're more self-sacrificing. There's a dependence on the group. In my case, I was very self-sufficient, very self-reliant, worked much independently, worked as an individual. And so those skills that I developed, as I said earlier, are serving me well now because I'm hunting and gathering all the information I can find about what I need for my future. Uh, in particular, today, I'm going to to you about what I found about different foods, especially organic foods and non GMO, and what that means to my life. Let's look at another topic, understanding how, now that we've talked a little bit about our backgrounds, using myself as an example, understanding how you view yourself versus how you view others and what happens to you when you're in those various contexts. Let's take going to a doctor first as an example. So when I go to a doctor's office now, I have to do what we call code shift, and I have to understand I'm a patient. And that's how I'm viewed. Doesn't matter what my background is, what my education and degree. Um, and so I've had to learn or I've had to remember that uh, typically the physicians I saw initially were male. They are about my age, give or take a few years. But they were graduated and educated during a time when it was male domination in the medical field. Now, there are more women who are physicians. But even there was a book I just referenced recently called Calling All Women from Glass Slipper to Glass Ceiling by Christina Carballo Perlman. And she writes, we're starting to understand the difference between thoughtful leadership and dominating behavior. There are enough of us who believe in the equal right of everyone to voice opinions. And she talked about, even as a physician who's a woman within medicine, how difficult it is. So when culturally, I've had to be very aware when I go to every time I go to the doctor, I have to remember I'm a patient. have to remember my role. But remember, I'm a hunter-gatherer, so I go in with journal articles and I go in with a lot of questions. I go in with a lot of research. I go in with information that I found to challenge maybe what they're recommending. But in order for me to be a member of that team, in order for me to be able to get my labs and my scans and various things ordered, I have to remember to play the role of patient. That's been a learning experience for me, but very, very important. And for persons that maybe aren't as strong as me in terms of my personality and experience and ability to maneuver through libraries and search for information, I can't imagine how difficult it must be for persons to go and seek information from the medical profession. Similarly, I went to integrative medicine and I met a social worker, and I was real excited. It was the first time I'd found the integrative medicine office, and so I was telling her about the cancer and my story and so forth and so on. And she looked at me, and again, I say that professionals get themselves in what we call little silos. Uh, they have sort of standardized behavior from their education and training. And she looked at me and said, I have to tell you, Mary, I'm a mandated reporter. And I just paused with my story and I thought, what are you saying? And she said, if you're depressed or suicidal today, I have to report you. And I said, to the contrary, ma'am, I'm not depressed. I'm not suicidal. I'm happy. I'm alive. I'm having great experiences. And I'm happy I found your office so that some of the things I've heard about, there is an integrative medical office here at the facility I've been attending. And so at the end of our discussion, she said, when I record a summary of you, would you say that you have a feeling of gratitude? I said, yeah, that's a great word for what I feel. I have gratitude. I'm very grateful that I'm doing so well, given the diagnosis I had initially. So I would just say very briefly, it's important to remember there are cultural differences. There are cultures that then dictate rules in terms of our gender. I happen to be a woman, and so I've had to navigate as a woman through sort of a male dominated profession. And this isn't any different than what your literature in the Grow Network talks about. All the herbalists, remember the old days of witchcraft? All the women who had all the remedies and knowledge base, but they were persecuted as witches. So this is something that I think, again, that's where my interest lies. That's where my research and inquiry is going to continue in the future because I'm fascinated. Just because I'm a woman and just because I happen to be ill, the consequences of that, but it excites me and it propels me to look further, not only for my own health, but for the health of other persons, in particular women. And it's been interesting to have these conversations in the context of the Me Too movement. Now, I'm not political, I'm not active, but it's been very interesting to see, for example, another experience I just had recently. I went to the doctor because I have to go routinely for my scans and my lab work and so forth. Doctors, their routine is they have 10 to 15 minutes, right, for every patient. That's about, on average, what they allow, 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I've been at the medical facility for a couple years. I had several surgeries. I have extensive records in their system. And you expect minimally when you see a physician that they know a little bit about your background. And this gentleman was an OB/GYN oncologist specialist, specialized in robotics. And they started with the same old questions. What was the age of your first period? When did you have your last period? And I just wanted to say, Ken, is that how we're going to spend our 10 minutes together? I've had extensive surgeries. I'm much older than maybe the person you saw before. Did you even read my chart? But again, in the context, I had to understand who I am, who he was, and act appropriately within that in order to get in his queue, so to speak, so that I could receive services should I need those in the future. So, It's very important that you know who you are and that you understand who you are in the context. And if you're real shy or you're real quiet or you're used to listening and sort of following the guidance of others, in the case of a person with cancer, because there's so much information that's emerging about it on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. Again, I would encourage you to understand your needs, maybe make a list of questions, and understand also contextually when you seek out other providers, whether they're in traditional healthcare or they're in alternative therapies, you need to understand what that means and what's going to happen and participate accordingly within that.